I married a billionaire for survival. But I didn't know he chose me for a reason I was never supposed to find out. The silk of the wedding dress felt too smooth against Lily Monroe's skin, like it didn't belong to her, like none of this did. The towering glass walls of the penthouse suite reflecting a version of herself she barely recognized. A girl who used to count coins for coffee, now standing in heels that cost more than a month of rent, her fingers trembling just slightly as she adjusted the simple ring already resting on her hand. Not a diamond yet, just the placeholder, temporary, just like this. Marriage was supposed to be, just like everything Ethan Carter had promised her. 6 months, he had said, his voice calm, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't ask twice. You play the role, I solve your problems. And she had nodded because what else could she do when hospital bills stacked higher than hope and eviction notices didn't care about pride? But now as she stared at her reflection, something didn't feel temporary anymore. Something felt planned, precise, like she had stepped into a story that had already been written before she ever said yes. Outside the suite, the muted hum of a city that never stopped filled the air. New York stretching endlessly beneath them, cold and powerful, just like the man she was about to marry. Ethan Carter, billionaire, CEO, a name that carried weight in rooms she would never have entered on her own. A man who always seemed 2 steps ahead, even in silence. And that was what unsettled her the most. Not the wealth, not the contract, but the way he looked at her sometimes, like he was waiting for something, like he already knew how this would end. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palm against the cool glass window, grounding herself, reminding herself why she was here, her mother's voice echoing faintly in her memory, soft and tired, hospital machines humming in the background. Just take care of yourself, Lily. And this was her way of doing that. Even if it meant stepping into a life built on rules and secrets, she turned as. The door behind her opened quietly. No rush, no noise, just presence. Ethan stepped inside, perfectly composed in a tailored suit, his dark eyes settling on her with that same unreadable calm. He didn't smile. He rarely did. But there was something there, something she couldn't quite name. They're ready, he said simply, his voice low, steady, as if this was just another business deal, just another signature on paper, and maybe for him. It was. Lily swallowed, nodding once, her fingers brushing the edge of the contract resting on the table, the ink already dry, the terms already set. No love, no expectations, no truth beyond what was necessary. She had read it twice, memorized it even, but nowhere in those pages did it explain why he chose her, a waitress from nowhere, no connections, no power, no reason, except that he needed someone disposable, someone quiet, someone who wouldn't ask questions. And maybe that was what she told herself to make it easier, because the alternative, the feeling creeping in her chest, the quiet suspicion that this wasn't random at all, that terrified her more than anything. Ethan extended his hand, not forceful, not demanding, just there, waiting, a silent invitation or maybe a silent command. Lily hesitated for just a fraction of a second before placing her hand in his. The warmth of his touch steady, grounding, but also binding. And as he led her toward the door, toward the ceremony that would seal everything into place, she couldn't shake the thought echoing in her mind, quiet but persistent. What if this wasn't the beginning of something temporary? What if this was the moment her life stopped being her own? The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes, and yet every second of it felt stretched, heavy, like time itself was watching, waiting to see if she would hesitate, if she would run. But Lily Monroe did not run. She stood there under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, her hand resting lightly in Ethan Carter's as the officiant spoke words she barely registered. Words about union and commitment that sounded almost ironic given the contract sitting quietly in her mind, signed, sealed, and far more binding than any vow spoken out loud. She repeated the lines when prompted, her voice steady even if her thoughts were not. And when Ethan said his part, his tone did not change, calm, controlled, as if he was confirming a merger rather than a marriage. And then it was done, just like that, a single nod, a simple exchange of rings. And suddenly she was no longer Lily Monroe, waitress with overdue bills and borrowed time. She was Lily Carter, wife of one of the most powerful men in the city. The applause was polite, contained, A handful of executives and legal witnesses standing at a respectful distance. No family, no friends, no celebration. Just quiet acknowledgement of a deal completed. Ethan's hand remained on hers a second longer than necessary before he let go. And for a brief moment, she wondered if that pause meant anything at all, or if she was already starting to imagine meaning where there was none. "We have a car waiting," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, and she nodded, following him out of the room, down a private elevator that descended in smooth silence, the mirrored walls reflecting them side by side. Perfectly composed, perfectly mismatched. She caught her own reflection again, searching for something familiar, something real, but all she saw was a version of herself shaped by circumstance, by necessity, by a choice that no longer felt like a choice at all. Outside, the city air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and asphalt, the black car waiting at the curb like it had always been there, like this moment had been scheduled long before she ever stepped into that cafe. The driver opened the door without a word, and Ethan gestured for her to get in first, a small courtesy that felt oddly formal, like everything else about him. She slid into the seat, the leather cool against her skin, and he followed, the door closing with a soft finality that echoed louder than it should have. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, the city lights passing by in blurred streaks as the car moved forward, and then Lily finally turned to him, unable to hold it in any longer. "Why me?" she asked, the question simple but loaded with everything she had been trying not to think about. Ethan did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed ahead, his expression unreadable as ever, and when he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "You fit the requirements," he said, and something about that answer made her chest tighten, not because it was cruel, but because it was incomplete, because it sounded like the kind of truth that was meant to end a conversation, not start one. She let out a small breath, looking away, telling herself that this was what she had agreed to. No questions, no expectations, just 6 months, and then freedom. But even as she tried to settle into that thought, she noticed something else, something small but impossible to ignore. Ethan's hand resting on his knee, fingers tapping once, twice, a subtle, almost invisible break in his composure. And for the first time, she realized that maybe he was not as unaffected as he wanted her to believe. Maybe there was something beneath the surface, something he was not saying, something he could not afford to say. And as the car disappeared into the flow of the city, Lily leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes for just a moment, not to rest, but to think, because deep down, past the contract, past the silence, past the carefully constructed distance between them, one thought refused to fade. This was not random, and whatever reason Ethan Carter had for choosing her, it was not written anywhere she could see. The penthouse did not feel like a home. It felt like a place designed to impress people who were never meant to stay. Every surface polished, every detail deliberate, the kind of space where nothing was out of place because nothing personal was ever allowed to exist. And as Lily stepped inside for the first time as something more than a guest, she realized that she did not know where she was supposed to belong within it. The floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the living room, revealing a sweeping view of Manhattan that most people only saw in movies, the city glowing beneath them like something untouchable. Ethan walked ahead of her, setting his keys down with the same quiet precision he carried into everything. And for a moment, she just stood there near the entrance, unsure if she should move, unsure if she should speak. Unsure if this was her space now, or just another part of the agreement she had yet to fully understand. "Your room is down the hall," Ethan said without turning around, his tone neutral, not cold, but not warm either, just distant enough to remind her that this was still an arrangement. Lily blinked slightly. The word "you're" catching her attention, not ours, not shared. "Your." She nodded slowly and followed his direction, her heels softer against the hardwood floor as she moved, passing abstract paintings and minimalist furniture that looked more like art than something meant to be used. The hallway was quiet, almost too quiet, until she reached the door at the end and pushed it open. The room inside was larger than her entire apartment had been, sunlight spilling across a neatly made bed, a closet already filled with clothes that still had tags on them, her size, her style, or at least a version of her style that had been carefully studied and recreated. Lily stepped inside slowly, her fingers brushing against one of the dresses, soft fabric, expensive. Chosen. She frowned slightly, her chest tightening with a feeling she could not immediately name. This was not generosity. This was preparation. Someone had thought this through. Someone had made sure she would fit perfectly into a role before she even knew she was playing it. She turned back toward the hallway, just as Ethan appeared in the doorway, leaning lightly against the frame, his expression unreadable as he watched her take it all in. If anything does not fit, let them know, he said. Simple, efficient, like he was discussing office logistics. Lily crossed her arms slightly, not defensive, but grounding herself. You planned all this, she said. Not quite a question, more like a realization spoken out loud. Ethan did not deny it. He simply met her gaze, steady, calm. I do not leave things to chance, he replied. And there it was again, that subtle confirmation that everything about this, including her, had been calculated. Lily let out a quiet breath, turning her attention back to the room as if that might make it easier to process. But her mind kept circling back, not to the contract, not to the money, but to him, to the way he spoke, the way he avoided answers without technically lying, and the way he seemed to already know exactly how this would unfold. Dinner is at 7, he added after a brief pause, already stepping back into the hallway, already creating distance again, and just like that, he was gone, leaving her alone in a room that felt both like a gift and a question she had not yet figured out how to ask. Lily moved toward the window, looking out over the city once more, her reflection faint against the glass. And for the first time since stepping into this world, she did not see a girl who got lucky or a girl who made a deal. She saw someone who had been placed, deliberately, carefully, like a piece on a board she could not yet see. And as that realization settled in, quiet but undeniable, one thought rose above the rest. She was not here by accident, and whatever role she was meant to play, she had a feeling she had only just stepped into the beginning of it. Dinner felt less like a meal and more like a performance. The long dining table set with precision, each plate placed exactly where it belonged, each glass catching the soft glow of overhead lighting, and Lily could not shake the feeling that even the silence had been arranged. She sat across from Ethan, the distance between them measured not just in feet, but in something far more deliberate. He had changed into a dark suit again, as if he never truly left that role, as if this entire life required constant presentation, and she wondered if he ever allowed himself to simply exist without control, without calculation. A server moved quietly between them, placing dishes she did not recognize, food that looked more like art than something meant to be eaten, and for a moment she hesitated, unsure which utensil to reach for, unsure which version of herself she was supposed to be here. But then she remembered the way he had said it earlier. You fit the requirements, and something in her straightened, not pride exactly, but resolve. She picked up the correct fork, steady, composed. Even if she had to fake it, she would not look out of place, not tonight. Ethan watched her briefly, just a flicker of attention before returning to his meal. But she noticed it, the way his gaze lingered a second longer than necessary, like he was checking something off a list only he could see. Tomorrow night is a charity gala, he said after a few minutes, his voice cutting through the quiet without effort. You will attend with me. Lily nodded slowly, setting her glass down. And what exactly am I supposed to be? She asked, her tone calm but direct. Ethan did not hesitate. My wife, he replied simply, as if that answered everything, as if that word alone carried all the instructions she would need. Lily let out a soft breath, her fingers brushing the edge of her plate. That is not really an answer, she said, and for a brief moment, something shifted in the air between them, not tension exactly, but awareness. Ethan leaned back slightly, studying her now, not dismissing, not avoiding, but engaging. You smile when required, he said, his voice measured. You speak when addressed, and you do not reveal anything about our arrangement. Lily held his gaze, steady, searching. And what happens if I do? She asked quietly, not as a challenge, but as a question she needed answered. Ethan's expression did not change, but something in his eyes darkened just slightly. Not anger, not threat, but seriousness. You will not, he said, not forceful, but certain, and that certainty lingered longer than the words themselves. She nodded once, breaking eye contact as she looked back down at her plate, telling herself that this was part of the deal, that none of this should surprise her. And yet, there it was again, that quiet unease, that feeling that she was following a script she had never seen. The rest of the meal passed with minimal conversation, the kind that filled space but did not build connection. And when it was over, Ethan stood first, as if concluding a meeting. "A stylist will arrive in the morning," he said, already turning away, already moving on to the next step. Lily watched him for a moment, something inside her shifting, something small but undeniable, because the more time she spent here, the more she realized this was not just about appearances, it was about control, about precision, about ensuring that every piece stayed exactly where it was meant to be, including her. Later that night, alone in her room, Lily stood in front of the mirror again, the same reflection, the same unfamiliar version of herself. But now there was something else in her eyes, not just uncertainty, but awareness. She reached up, touching the simple ring on her finger, the placeholder, temporary, just like everything else, and yet it felt heavier now, like it carried more than it should, like it meant more than it was supposed to. She let her hand fall slowly, her thoughts drifting back to the way Ethan had looked at her earlier, the way he always seemed to be watching, measuring, waiting. And as she turned off the lights and stepped into the quiet of the room, one thought settled in, clear and steady. Tomorrow would not just be another event, it would be a test, and for reasons she still could not fully understand. She had a feeling she was the one being evaluated. The next morning arrived too quickly, or maybe Lily had not truly slept at all, her mind replaying every word, every glance, every silence from the night before, until the line between thought and reality blurred into something restless and unresolved. The knock on her door came at exactly 9 o'clock, precise, expected, just like everything else in this world. And when she opened it, two women stepped in with polite smiles and professional calm, carrying garment bags and cases filled with brushes, palettes, and tools that seemed more suited for a film set than a real life. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," one of them said, her tone warm but practiced, and Lily felt that unfamiliar weight again at the name. Mrs. Carter, it still did not belong to her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she nodded and stepped aside, allowing them in. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of movement and transformation, fabric chosen, makeup applied, hair styled into something effortless yet intentional, every detail refined until the girl in the mirror no longer looked like someone trying to fit in, but someone who had always been there, someone who belonged, and that realization unsettled her more than anything else, because it meant the illusion was working. It meant Ethan's world could absorb her without resistance, without question. When they were done, the room fell quiet again, and Lily stood alone in front of the mirror, her reflection staring back with calm confidence she did not fully feel. The dress was elegant, deep emerald, fitted perfectly as if it had been made for her. Just like everything else, she exhaled slowly, lifting her chin just slightly, practicing the version of herself she would have to become tonight. Someone composed, someone untouchable, someone who did not ask why. Downstairs, the car was already waiting, and Ethan stood beside it, dressed in a black suit that seemed almost too perfect, like it had never known imperfection. His eyes lifted as she approached, and for a brief second, something changed in his expression. Subtle but real, like he had expected her to look good, but not like this, not like someone who could stand beside him without looking out of place. He did not say it. Of course, he never said things like that, but she saw it anyway, in the way his gaze lingered just a moment longer, in the way his posture shifted slightly before returning to its usual control. He opened the car door for her without a word, and she stepped inside, the silence between them different now, not empty, but charged with something neither of them acknowledged. The drive to the gala was smooth, the city lights already beginning to glow as evening settled in. And as they approached the venue, Lily felt it again, that quiet tightening in her chest. Not fear exactly, but awareness. This was not just another event. This was where everything would be seen, judged, measured. The car came to a stop, and through the tinted window, she could see flashes of cameras, silhouettes of people waiting, voices rising in anticipation, the world Ethan belonged to, and now, by extension, the world she had been placed into. He turned to her then, finally breaking the silence, his voice low, steady. "Stay close to me," he said, not as an order, but as something else, something almost protective, and that caught her off guard more than anything else had so far. She nodded once, her hand instinctively brushing the ring on her finger before resting in her lap, grounding herself, reminding herself why she was here. The door opened, the noise rushed in, and Ethan stepped out first before offering his hand. Lily hesitated for just a fraction of a second before taking it, the warmth of his grip steady, familiar now in a way she had not expected, and as she stepped out beside him, into the lights, into the attention, into the version of life she was still trying to understand, one thought echoed quietly in her mind. This was not just about pretending anymore. This was about surviving something far more complicated than a simple arrangement. Because somewhere between the contract and the silence, between the control and the unknown, the lines were already starting to blur, and she was no longer sure which parts of this were real and which parts had been planned from the very beginning. The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, everything shifted, the quiet control of the car replaced by flashes of light, voices calling Ethan's name, cameras capturing every angle as if this moment mattered more than anything else happening in the world. Lily felt it instantly, the weight of attention, the unspoken expectations pressing in from every direction, but Ethan's hand remained steady in hers, grounding, guiding, and for a brief second, she allowed herself to follow his pace, his rhythm, the way he moved through the crowd without hesitation, without doubt, as if this world had always belonged to him. "Ethan, over here," someone called, and he turned slightly, offering a practiced nod, his expression composed, unreadable, and then the attention shifted, just slightly, toward her. "Is this your wife?" Another voice asked, curious, evaluating, and Lily felt it, that pause, that moment where she could either disappear or step forward, and she chose. She stepped forward just enough, her posture straight, her gaze calm. "Yes," she said before Ethan could answer, her voice steady, clear, and for the first time since this began, she did not feel like she was pretending. She felt like she was deciding. The reaction was subtle but noticeable. A flicker of approval, a shift in tone, and Ethan glanced at her briefly, something unreadable passing through his eyes before it was gone again. Inside the venue, the atmosphere changed from public spectacle to controlled elegance, conversations low, laughter measured, every interaction carrying layers of meaning beneath the surface. Lily stayed close to Ethan as he had instructed, but she was no longer just following. She was observing, learning, noticing the way people approached him, the way their smiles never quite reached their eyes, the way their words were always calculated. And then it happened. A woman approached them, confident, composed, her presence commanding in a way that suggested familiarity. "Ethan," she said smoothly, her gaze sliding to Lily with quiet interest. "I see you finally made a decision." There was something in her tone, something layered, not quite approval, not quite challenge. And Lily felt it immediately, the shift in energy, Ethan's posture tightening. Just slightly beside her. "Victoria," he replied, his voice even, controlled, but not warm, never warm. The woman smiled faintly, turning her full attention to Lily now. "You must be the one who changed everything," she said, and the words lingered longer than they should have, because they did not sound like a compliment. They sounded like a statement, like a conclusion already reached. Lily held her gaze, steady, refusing to look away. "I am Lily," she said simply, not offering more, not asking questions. And for a brief moment, something flickered in Victoria's expression, something almost like surprise, before it was replaced with polite indifference. "Of course you are," she said softly. And then she turned back to Ethan, lowering her voice just enough that it should have been private, but not enough to be completely hidden. "Be careful," she added, and then she was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Lily did not speak immediately, but she felt it. The shift in Ethan beside her, the way his attention followed Victoria for just a second too long before returning to neutral. And that was when she knew. This was not just about appearances. This was not just about a contract or a role. There were other players, other layers, things happening beneath the surface that she had not been told. Who is she? Lily asked quietly, her voice calm but direct. Ethan did not answer right away, his gaze scanning the room as if calculating something unseen, and when he finally spoke, his tone was measured. "Someone who does not matter," he said. But Lily knew better now. She knew that silence and avoidance were answers in themselves. And as the evening continued, as conversations came and went, as smiles were exchanged and hands were shaken, one thing became clear. She was not just being introduced into Ethan's world. She was being placed into something far more complex, something already in motion, and whatever secret lay beneath all of this, it was not just his to carry anymore. The rest of the gala blurred into a series of controlled conversations and measured smiles, but Lily's mind stayed anchored to that one moment, to Victoria's words, to the way Ethan had dismissed her without truly answering. And the more she thought about it, the more the silence between what was said and what was hidden began to feel intentional, like a door left slightly open but never enough to see inside. By the time the event began to wind down, the room thinning as guests filtered out into the night, Lily found herself standing near one of the tall glass windows overlooking the city, the noise fading just enough for her thoughts to finally catch up with her. She exhaled slowly, her reflection faint in the glass. That same unfamiliar version of herself staring back, composed, elegant, but now carrying something else beneath the surface: awareness, questions, and a quiet refusal to remain in the dark. "You handled yourself well tonight." Ethan's voice came from behind her, low, steady, and she did not turn immediately. She let the silence stretch just a second longer before facing him, her expression calm but searching. "That was not part of the contract," she replied, and for a brief moment, something shifted in his gaze. Not surprise, but recognition, like he understood exactly what she meant. "No," he said simply, and then the space between them filled with something unspoken, something heavier than before. Lily took a small step closer, her voice lowering, not confrontational, but firm. "Neither was her warning," she added, and this time, Ethan did not look away, but he did not answer either, his silence no longer neutral, no longer controlled in the same way. There was tension there now, subtle but real, and Lily felt it. The shift from arrangement to something more complicated. "You said she does not matter," she continued, her eyes holding his. "But people who do not matter do not give warnings like that." Ethan exhaled quietly, his jaw tightening just slightly, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked conflicted, not lost, not uncertain, but caught between something he could not easily control. "There are things you do not need to be involved in," he said finally, his tone measured, but softer now, less distant. And that only made it worse, because it was not dismissal, it was protection, and Lily felt it immediately, that subtle shift in intention, and it unsettled her more than anything else had so far. "You mean things you do not want me to know," she corrected gently, and the words landed between them with quiet precision. Ethan did not respond right away, his gaze dropping for just a second before returning to her, and in that moment, Lily saw it clearly, not the CEO, not the man in control of everything around him, but something underneath, something human, something guarded, and that was when it clicked, not fully, not completely, but enough to change everything. This was never just about a contract, never just about appearances. He had not chosen her because she was convenient. He had chosen her because she mattered in a way he was not ready to admit. "Why me?" she asked again. The same question from the car, but now it carried more weight, more understanding, more insistence. Ethan held her gaze, and for a moment, it felt like he might finally answer, like the truth was right there, just beneath the surface. But then he stepped back, just slightly, the distance returning, the control settling back into place. "Because you were the right choice," he said, and this time, it was not enough. Lily felt it immediately, the gap between the words and the truth, and something inside her shifted, not anger, not hurt, but clarity. She nodded once, slowly, not because she accepted his answer, but because she understood what it meant. He was not ready to tell her, and she was no longer willing to wait for permission to find out. The silence stretched between them again, but it was different now, no longer empty, no longer uncertain. It was filled with intent, with questions waiting to be answered. And as they left the gala together, the city lights reflecting off the glass and steel around them. Lily made a quiet decision, one that settled deep and steady within her. If this world had pulled her in for a reason, then she would not stand still inside it. She would find the truth herself, no matter how carefully it had been hidden. And for the first time since she stepped into Ethan Carter's life, she was no longer just part of the plan, she was about to change it. The ride back from the gala was quieter than before, but not empty. The kind of silence that carried weight, that pressed in from all sides until it demanded to be acknowledged. And this time Lily did not try to ignore it. She sat beside Ethan with her hands resting calmly in her lap, her posture composed, but her mind moving faster than it had since the moment she stepped into his world, every detail replaying, every word examined, every pause reconsidered. By the time the car came to a smooth stop outside the penthouse, her decision had already settled into place. Not impulsive, not reckless, but clear. She stepped out without waiting, her heels steady against the pavement as she moved toward the entrance. Ethan followed a step behind, his presence familiar now, but no longer something she relied on for direction. Inside, the elevator ride felt longer than usual, the mirrored walls reflecting two people standing side by side, but no longer moving in sync. When the doors opened, Lily walked ahead this time, not rushing, not dramatic, just intentional, and she did not stop in her room. She turned instead toward the hallway she had not explored before, the one that led to Ethan's office. She had noticed it on her first day. The door always closed, always untouched, like a boundary that had never been spoken but always understood. Until now. Lily, Ethan's voice came from behind her, calm, but with a subtle edge she had not heard before, and she paused, her hand resting lightly on the handle, not opening it yet, not turning back either. "If there are things I am not supposed to know," she said quietly, her voice steady, "then maybe I am already too involved." The words hung in the air, simple, but impossible to dismiss. Ethan stepped closer, not close enough to stop her, but close enough that she could feel the shift in his presence, the control tightening, the distance narrowing. "That room is not part of this arrangement," he said. And there it was again, the contract, the boundaries, the rules that had defined everything from the beginning. But something about it felt different now, weaker somehow, like a line that had already been crossed, even if neither of them had said it out loud. Lily exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening just slightly around the handle before she finally turned to face him, her expression calm, but her eyes clear, certain. "Neither was marrying me for a reason you will not admit," she replied, and for the first time, the words landed, not deflected, not absorbed, but felt. Ethan's gaze held hers, steady, but no longer unreadable. There was something there now, something closer to conflict, to hesitation, and that was all she needed. She turned back and pushed the door open. The room inside was dimly lit, organized, controlled, just like everything else in his life, shelves lined with files, a desk cleared of anything unnecessary. But it was not the space itself that caught her attention. It was what sat on the far side of the desk, a single folder, slightly out of place, as if it had been used recently, as if it mattered more than the others. Lily stepped inside slowly, aware of Ethan behind her, aware of the tension building in the space between them. But she did not stop. She reached the desk, her hand hovering for just a second before opening the folder, and everything shifted. Inside were documents, old, carefully preserved, names, signatures, records of ownership, and right there, unmistakable, was a name she had not seen in years, Monroe, her last name. Her breath caught, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet, sharp realization settling in all at once. She flipped through the pages quickly, her eyes scanning, connecting pieces she did not even know existed until now. Her father's name, a company she had never heard him speak about, shares, percentages, and then, at the very bottom, something that made everything else fall into place. A legal document naming a beneficiary, her, Lily Monroe, the rightful heir to a stake in the very company Ethan controlled. The silence in the room became absolute, heavy, undeniable. She closed the folder slowly, her hands steady even as her thoughts raced, and when she turned back to Ethan, everything had changed, not just her understanding, but the balance between them. "This is why," she said softly, Not a question, not anymore, just the truth. Spoken out loud. And for the first time since this began, Ethan did not try to deny it. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was complete, like everything that had been hidden had finally found its place in the open. Lily stood there with the folder still in her hands, the weight of it no longer just paper, but truth. And for the first time since she had stepped into Ethan's world, she was no longer trying to understand it. She was seeing it clearly, every calculated move, every unanswered question, every moment that had felt slightly off now aligned into something undeniable. She looked at him, really looked at him, not as the billionaire, not as the man who controlled every room he entered, but as someone who had made a choice long before she ever knew she was part of it. "You knew who I was before you ever walked into that cafe," she said quietly, her voice steady, and Ethan did not interrupt. He did not correct her. He simply held her gaze, and that was answer enough. Lily let out a slow breath, placing the folder gently back on the desk. Her movements calm, deliberate. "You did not marry me because I fit the requirements," she continued. "You married me because I am part of this company." Her eyes flicked briefly to the documents before returning to him. "Because I own something you needed to protect or control." She did not say it out loud, but the thought lingered between them anyway. Ethan took a step forward, the distance between them narrowing. But for the first time, Lily did not step back. She stood her ground, not defensive, not afraid, just certain. "I married you because if I did not, someone else would have found you first," he said, and his voice was different now, not controlled in the same way, not distant, but honest in a way she had not heard before. "There are people who would have used that information against you, against the company," he added. And for a moment, Lily felt the truth in that, not just the words, but the weight behind them, the reason he had not said it, the reason he had built everything so carefully around her. But it did not erase what had been done. It did not undo the fact that her choice had never been fully hers. "So you decided for me," she said softly, not accusing, but stating the reality of it. Ethan did not deny it. He did not try to justify it further, and that silence spoke louder than anything else could have. Lily nodded slowly, absorbing it, not reacting with anger or disbelief, but with clarity, because now she understood the full picture, the contract, the marriage, the control. It had all been built on a single truth, one he had kept from her until she found it herself. She turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward the window beyond the office. The city still alive outside, unchanged, indifferent to the shift that had just taken place inside this room. "You said this was temporary," she murmured, almost to herself. 6 months, and then we walk away." Her fingers brushed lightly against the ring on her hand, the same gesture she had made before, but now it meant something different. Now it was not just a symbol of an agreement, but of a choice she had yet to make. Ethan watched her closely, his expression no longer unreadable. There was something there now, something real, something unguarded. "It was never meant to stay that way," he said quietly, and the words landed with more weight than anything else he had said so far. Lily turned back to him, her eyes searching his, and for a moment, everything else faded. The contract, the company, the secrets, all of it falling away until there was just this, two people standing in the truth of what this had become, not what it started as, but what it had grown into. "That is not your decision to make," she said, her voice calm, but firm. And Ethan nodded, just once, accepting it, not fighting it, not trying to control the outcome the way he had controlled everything else. And that, more than anything, shifted something inside her, because for the first time, he was not trying to lead, not trying to direct, he was waiting. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was different, not heavy, not tense, but open, like something had been cleared away, like the truth had created space where there had only been structure before. Lily took a slow breath, her thoughts settling into something steady, something certain. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, not out of obligation, not out of the contract, but because she chose to, her voice softer now, but no less clear. "Then if this is real," she said, her eyes holding his, "it starts with the truth, all of it." Ethan did not hesitate this time. He nodded, not as a businessman, not as a strategist, but as a man who understood what he was being asked, and what it would cost. And as the city lights reflected around them, no longer distant, no longer separate, Lily felt it,